What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with Steve,
Oh well.
as always, and this is going to be our halfway mark podcast. But we're going to talk about some news first. So, like, the first half is pretty much going to be some NHL news, and then the second half we'll kind of talk about where teams are at the halfway mark. So we're going to start by talking about a couple of incidents that occurred, not in the NHL, but in the AHL and ECHL. And I think it's just important to kind of bring it up because this is just like a general hockey podcast, but this is something that affects the entire sport, right? So in the AHL, San Jose Barracuda forward Christoph Rabik, I think I'm saying his name correctly, made a racial gesture towards Boko Imama. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Sorry if I'm getting either of these names incorrectly. I don't think there was a video of this, or at least if there was, I didn't see it, but allegedly the motion was something about like eating a banana, insinuating like, the whole like monkey gesture and stuff. And he was suspended 30 games for that. And then there was another incident in the ECHL where forward Jacob Panetta allegedly made a racist taunt at Jordan Subban, kind of doing like a slouched over, arms at his side kind of monkey gesture, which he alleges he was trying to do like the Tom Wilson strongman pose, and then he's gone on record on Twitter as saying that he's done it before. He posted a video of him doing it to another player before. So just to kind of touch all the bases here, the Jacob Panetta one is a much more gray area than the Christoph Rabik one. Christoph Rabik was pretty cut and dry from what I understand. There was no misinterpreting anything going on there. The Jacob Panetta one, he's adamant that it was not a racist gesture. It's something he's done before. However, he has been suspended indefinitely, and he was also released from his team, Jacob Panetta was. Jacob also went on Twitter to post an apology video. He tagged Jordan Subban. He's also gone on record to say, which I think is really admirable of him to say, he said, listen, like, I wasn't trying to make a racial gesture at Jordan Subban, but regardless, his interpretation matters more than my intention in this instance because of the history of racial injustices towards African Americans in both the United States and in Canada. So he admits that even if this wasn't what he intended to, he needs to take into account, how Jordan Subban might have felt and interpreted it and stuff like that. So, it's unfortunate that we have to kind of talk about this again, given that I'm pretty sure we touched on this at some point last year as well.
Oh, 100%. We've talked about this, I think, almost every year. Well, we've only had the show, this is our second season now, or our third season.
Yeah, it's our third year.
So, yeah, I think in the last 3 years, we've had to talk about something to this varying degree every year, or some controversy that, like, stems from some level of this, right? Maybe it's not necessarily, like, an overt racial gesture or something. It might be more of, like, a closed-door controversy, but yeah, I think, like, we've had to talk about this a lot, more than we really should on a hockey podcast. And not like a social issues podcast. We're not like, hey guys, welcome to NPR. Like,
yeah.
So it's just it's an unfortunate reality of, like, I guess us being responsible podcasters, responsible members of our community, feeling the need to like touch on it because it is important, but also like it's disappointing that like we have to keep talking about it because people can't get it through their fucking heads that like you shouldn't do stuff like this to people.
Right.
You know?
Like, not to. Just so there's no misinterpretations of what we're saying, it's not unfortunate that we have to keep talking about it because we don't want to talk about it. I mean, obviously, we don't want to talk about people
We'd
being
rather
targeted.
Talk about hockey, yeah.
But it's unfortunate that it keeps happening, is what we're getting at, right? Like,
yeah, it's more so that like it's how dumb are these people that like you're still intolerant in 2022? You know what I mean? Like, and again, like the Jacob Panetta thing, right? His first name is Jacob.
Yeah.
Okay, so like that whole thing is, like you said, very like murky in the way it's presented because there is video, but again, like you were saying to me, because I haven't seen the video personally, that it's like it's very murky and unclear as to like everything that's happening, and him wading into the waters to defend himself only kind of made it murkier. But like it is admirable of him to like say that even if what I did wasn't wasn't meant that way. Like the way he interpreted it is way more important. So like I appreciate that like he's using this as like a learning moment more than like a oh like a there's no
He's not
there's
self-indignant.
yeah, there's almost like seemingly no backlash. Like he seemingly understands the backlash that he's getting. You know what I mean? Like he's self-aware enough to understand like, oh, my bad, you know? And so like this is in a situation where I think like this guy is going to get written out of hockey because he's a racist, you know? Like this is just like you got to be a little smarter, use your thinker a little more, but like at the end of the day like I don't think we should be passing judgment or like damnation on like Jacob Panetta as a whole because there's no history of this before. Like this is like the first I'm ever hearing of this guy at all, you know?
So it's actually interesting because that's what I kind of wanted to discuss with you because like, I don't want to go over like if it's not clear enough already. Obviously, Steve and I are not supporting racism, and we think that it has absolutely no place in our game. Racism of any kind or prejudice of any kind, right? Like race, religion, sexuality, sex, gender identity, anything that doesn't have to do with hockey, basically, has no place, on an ice rink, right? Like if you
Right.
want to chirp a guy for being ugly, you want to say he has like a big nose. It's like okay, yeah, say he has a big nose, but you can't say oh you have a big nose because you're Jewish. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
that,
there's no reason to drag the other factors in.
right? Like if you want to tell Marshawn he looks like a rat and he's ugly, then fine, yeah, go for it. If you want to tell a guy he sucks at hockey, he sucks at hockey, right? But you know, uh, uh, basically bringing your prejudices into the game. Obviously, Steve and I don't stand for it, so I'm not going to reiterate that again. We're not going to spend another 40 minutes on that because if you want to hear our thoughts on it, we've talked about it several times. But I do want to
Hmm.
ask. This has kind of brought a new sort of debate up um, in the hockey community, and that's how do we handle these situations? And I'm going to present like the two kind of sides that I've seen going back and forth in the hockey community, and then I kind of want to get your opinion on it. So the one side is you handle it like the Jacob Panetta incident, right? Where suspended indefinitely, released from your team. He'll probably likely never play, or not at least not play in ECHL for the remainder of this season. Probably not for a while, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the one train of thought I've seen running around on social media is, yeah, if there's a racist incident, you ban him from the game immediately. They get him out of here, one and done, never again, right? And the other side of the coin, people are saying that while yes, you ban the person who may have made a racially charged gesture from the game indefinitely, it doesn't really solve the problem in the sense that like there's no teaching going on. So like the other side of the thing that I've seen is people are suggesting you slap them with a pretty hefty suspension. They're not saying 1 or 2 games, like a half a season, 30 to 40 game suspension,
Right.
and then you offer or you not offer, but if they want to come back, you then have to go through an inclusion class, which the NHL runs several diversity and inclusion classes, um, and then have a sit down talk with either the person that you targeted the gesture at, if they're willing, or if that person is unwilling to sit face to face with you, you sit with a representative of whatever community that you targeted them for. So if they're African American, you would sit with a representative of the African American community. If you targeted them for their religion, you'd sit with a member of their religious community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And their argument on that side of the coin is sometimes, the best way to stamp this kind of stuff out indefinitely is education. Because if you just ban the guy for being racist, who's to say that he's not going to just
Well, he
go
doesn't
have
learn
like,
anything, right?
right, well, yeah, exactly. Like, who's to say he doesn't like go and get a job, like teaching some youth hockey team, and then he's like spouting, or not spouting, but, like planting the seeds of this kind of thought, or like he has kids, his kids grow up to be hockey players,
Well,
they
that's
follow
really
in
it,
his
right? Like
footsteps.
like you slap him with this huge like okay, there's two schools of thought to this, right? And I think there's two different there's varying degrees of these incidences, right? Like obviously intolerance of any kind is not welcome at all, right? Like that's just not something that's we support at all. So like but there is something to be said for somebody who does something that like can be perceived as intolerant or makes something that like that's out of pocket from a place of ignorance and not necessarily a place of hatred. Like they do something and then like they realize like, oh no, I I really fucked up. Like you know what I mean? And like unless it's tough, right? Because like there are instances where like it's cut and dry. Like he said this is what it is. Like it's over. And I feel like though in those instances where like it's very clearly cut and dry and like I don't know. It's tough. I'm really not sure because like I agree with both points to a degree, but I see like as I'm talking, I see the holes forming, right? Because it's like
Yeah,
you start creating a gray area where it's like, okay, well, like what at what point does it cross the level from like ignorance to just like
hatred. You know.
yeah, because like at the end of the day, like hatred is just like weaponized ignorance. Like it's you hate things you don't understand or you're afraid of, you know. So like it's just like at what point does that cross the line from being like innocent ignorance and just like being like, oh shit, I didn't grow up around this, or I didn't grow up around people of this community, I didn't understand this, I wasn't aware of this,
I,
my bad.
I'll give you a good example, and one that I think anybody who's ever played hockey at any level can relate to. Right, the F slur specifically. Right, the one that
Oh yeah,
targets members of the LGBTQ plus community. Um, Unfortunately, in hockey, that gets thrown around quite a bit, and generally
I mean,
speaking, it's not being targeted at people who are outwardly LGBTQ plus. It's just something that's said, but it's still
which
something that
isn't right.
shouldn't be said.
Right, yeah. So here's the thing, right? And I would expand that to say like it's just very common among like I would argue more boys than girls, honestly, like
Certainly.
young boys, like so I feel like it's just really common among like boys of a certain age. So like it's unfortunate that it does bleed into like all level of sports that like it's just kind of something that people say. And I mean like listen, we're not angels. Like we were at fault for it at one point too. I was a stupid 14-year-old who threw it around before I realized like the weight and the power the words can have, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm
So
in the
like
same boat.
so like and obviously we grew and like are self-aware enough to understand like it's not okay. So like there is a level where like you can teach it. So like that's I guess to your point that is something that can change. Like you shouldn't be banning kids for stuff like that because like at the end of the day like you'd have to be banning like the whole hockey league and then nobody learns anything, you know?
Yeah, and I think part of it really is also that, generally speaking, like I said, that word is not used to specifically target people who are outwardly LGBTQ plus. It's just something that is said. Um,
People just like throw it around
Yeah,
and
and I think in an instance like that where you're not knowingly targeting somebody, that is where, to your point, would fall more on the ignorance side as opposed to hatred, because you're not really hating somebody, you're just
you don't
ignorant to
know.
the weight of the word,
Yeah.
you know?
You're just like using yeah, okay, so I guess that's like the clear intention, right? Like where it crosses those lines. I feel like racial lines, it's very clear. Like you cross those like certain lines like that, you cross, it's like, okay, that's not okay. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? There's no reason you shouldn't be ignorant of those words. Like everybody knows they like you can't say certain things to certain groups of people without it being like highly offensive, you know? Whereas like a word like that, like you said, like that, if you're not so I guess like that's a difference, or like that's a learning moment where like more racial slurs, there's nothing to be learned because they've probably already been exposed to it on some level in their life, unless they live under a fucking rock or grew up in like I don't know some like backwards county in Alabama that's like stuck in 1953 before Brown versus Board of Ed. Like so, there's really no excuse for you to be using those words or making gestures that are like can be conce- not conceived but conveyed that way or perceived that way. I feel like there's no room for that. So like I feel bad for Jacob Panetta, but at the end of the day, like play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and like you probably should have known better or been self-aware enough not to do something. Because like, listen, I get it. You want to look like the Tom Wilson strongman thing, but you have to be aware of like the crowd you're targeting, like the person you're like directing this at, and like the nature of the gesture. Because like it you put your arms up and tuck them under your hands under your arms in any degree it's somebody like of an African American descent or anything like that. It's you have to like you have to lack some level of self-awareness to do it, you know?
Yeah, it's just, I'm really glad that this is not my point to figure out where the punishment should lie.
Oh yeah, no. I'm glad I'm not in that board meeting because clearly I just talked in circles. I have no clear solution at all.
I honestly think that there's very good merit to both sides. I mean, on the one hand, if you're just straight up slapping people with lifetime bans who do this kind of thing, then you fix the problem in hockey, right? Because in theory, you won't have any more of those problems in hockey because you're just banning them from hockey. But at the same time, if you're not teaching them anything, you're not really helping to solve the root of the problem. It's like if you it's like, say for example, you fell off your bike because you have bad brakes, and yeah, you get your arm in a cast because you broke your arm, but you never fix the brakes. You're not
Yeah.
fixing the actual problem, and I think that really the only way to fix the problem is education. And I would like to see the NHL, even though in the NHL's credit, they do run several inclusion classes. They've done great things with the LGBTQ plus community with Pride Nights. The Vancouver Canucks have done a wonderful job with acknowledging the indigenous people in Canada.
They also do Chinese. They celebrate Chinese New Year because they have a large Asian Canadian population in Vancouver.
Yeah, I saw that. That was really cool last night. I thought
They
that
are
was
really cool.
awesome.
Last year's were fire too. They were like red and gold. They were really nice. But to
So
your point, real quick, I
yeah,
guess this really the question is like, where does the NHL or I guess the hockey establishment, right? So we'll just use like that as like a broad term for all the governing bodies, like the AHL, the ECHL, USA Hockey. Where does like the NHL's commitment lie to the game of hockey, and where does it end? You know what I mean? Like how far do they want to extend this into the community? Like, is the NHL interested in rooting out the problem at its core, or is the NHL more worried about rooting it out from the NHL itself and protecting its business? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because I can see the NHL only going so far, whereas like an organization like Hockey Canada or USA Hockey would go further because they're already in charge of development camps. Like they already run all of like the I don't know if it's like how to call it, but it's like accredited, I guess. Like it's all like the
the official ones.
certified.
Yeah,
Yeah, like they run all the leagues throughout the US. Like if you want to play in a junior A league, it's certified by USA Hockey. So I can see USA Hockey taking a more proactive approach in that regard where like they're using it as a moment to teach, whereas like the NHL, it's almost I could see them just saying no, ban, gone, like from the professional environment because
you're an
at the end of the
adult.
day, like, yeah, you're an adult. At the end of the day, like, the NHL is a business. You know what I mean? Like, they have an obligation to the community so far, and the NHL really does. As much as we give them shit, the NHL really does go above and beyond a lot of what people know and understand. And this goes like to the organizations themselves, and more so than just like the monolith that is the NHL as an organization. I mean, like the NHL is a community.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I can see them not wanting to be like them saying it's not my problem to root this out as a community issue, right? Because it's at the end of the day, like that's an untold number of money and resources the NHL could be pouring into other things that they'd probably rather be pouring into like growing the game in smaller communities and more non-traditional hockey markets. And so it's like I can see both sides and I can see both sides having merit in their respective environments, right? I think like Hockey Canada, USA Hockey, any sort of developmental league should be using it as an opportunity to teach or an opportunity to like maybe break down these biases and expose people to these things more at younger ages, like the Beavers and the Penguins. I don't know what those translate to in like other leagues, but that's what we
Midgets
called
and
like
bantams and stuff like that.
yeah, that's what we called like the smaller kids at like the deck hockey rink. So I kind of see like both sides having merit, and the fact that like they're arguing with each other is really funny because it's like both are right just in
Different
different
ways.
avenues. Yeah, like different both approaches are right, and I wouldn't fault the NHL for taking either approach realistically. Like if they take a zero, they obviously already have a zero tolerance approach, right? But if they double down on like a hard zero tolerance policy and like they just start throwing like chopping the axe, I wouldn't blame them because again, at the end of the day, they have to protect their brand, you know. And if you're not willing to sever yourself from somebody who's clearly very toxic to your brand, it's almost always going to damage you because then eventually you're going to end up with the negative connotation that the NFL has, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Which I know I keep using this comparison and I'm very aware of that fact, but it's just kind of the truth that like the NFL has a perceived like it's like a perceived haven of just like lawlessness almost, like the players almost always get away with anything,
If they're good at
you know?
football, yeah. Like
Yeah, I mean, like, you have Adrian Peterson who beat up his kid. You have like Ray Rice who beat up his girlfriend in an elevator. Like, and they still played with nary a slap on the wrist, really, when you think about it.
yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately your point is a really good one that to a certain extent unfortunately, by the time people are entering the National Hockey League, a lot of the times their opinions are kind of solidified. And that's not to say people can't change, because people can certainly change, but it's way, way easier to stop these racist opinions from forming ever by just exposing kids to it. And I mean, it's really unfortunate too, because quite honestly, when you see a lot of these stories about taunting and racial slurs and stuff in junior leagues, it's from the parents in the stands more often than the kids, and it's
Well, that's really the
horrible.
sad part, right? Because like the NH like for
What
what
are you teaching your kids, you know?
yeah, like hockey, USA Hockey or Hockey Canada, like these organizations can only go so far, and they really do try very hard. Like they have in the last couple of years, like really stepped up when it comes to like vetting coaches, like holding people accountable, running inclusion camps, like just like the NHL does, and like teaching sensitivity courses, things like that. So it's unfortunate, like they really are doing everything seemingly in their power, and that's not to say like they can't do more because we really all could, right? At the end of the day, but like it's sad that like they're doing everything they can to teach it, but like no matter what they do, at the end of the day, these kids still go home with their parents, and like no matter what you do, it's always an uphill battle sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, it's a shame, like because you could have a kid who doesn't feel any of these ways playing junior hockey, and now he has to face the repercussions of his family. You know what I mean? So now like his image is tainted, and he might never get a chance to go pro because of these things, and it's really a shame. And I'm not saying this like as a whoa, like oh, pitying racist, but it's like the kid himself has no problem, and it's like it's a shame that his parents such an asshole that he ruined this kid's chance, you know. And I'm not saying like from any experience. I'm just saying like in the hypothetical because you mentioned like these incidents mostly include parents,
Yeah, it's horrible because
and it's usually like parents of young kids too, which is like the weird part.
yeah, like there was an incident where there was a game of like kids that were like 10 to 12, and the parents were shouting like racial slurs from the stand. It's like, dude, do you know how, like we people say it all the time, but like your kids are not born hateful. They have no concept of racism or hate in their hearts when they're born. It's taught and it's learned, and you're teaching your kids this. How are you gonna look your kid in the face in the car on the way home and tell him don't hate people for their skin color when you're shouting that stuff up in the stands?
Right. And it's really just like one, it's like why are you yelling at children? Like 10 to 12-year-olds. Like I get that like listen, I coached uh deck hockey like kids that were, I think they were 14 to 18 in the league I coached. So like I get it and like you yell and but it's like there's a level you don't cross. You know what I mean? It's like one, why are you crossing that line, and like why do you think it's okay to say something like that to a 10-year-old? One. Two, why do you think it's okay to say something like that at all? And so it's just like I don't know. There's just it's so stupid. Like I don't get people at all, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean it's horrible. I mean, and we've seen other incidences too. Like there was I think it was a high school hockey game where there was the goalie on one of the teams was a woman, um, or I guess technically at that point she'd be considered, she's not a woman because a woman's 18. Whatever, she was a girl, right? Whatever you want to say. Um, just to clarify, yeah, she was like underage at the time. She's a kid, right, and playing high school
Yeah.
hockey. So it's a kid. She's playing goalie, and it started out that it was the parents who were like heckling her from the other team. Parents were heckling her and yelling at her, and you get heckled at hockey games all the time. But then they turned it to the fact that she was a girl, and then all the kids in the student section like joined in after that. And it's like that is the perfect example of adults influencing a bunch of kids to say horrible things, because like the adults started it. Like there was like a group of adults who were like haggling her, like, oh, just a girl, score on this girl, she's just a woman, right, etc., etc., like how you losing to a girl. And then like all the
Yeah.
kids joined in, and it's like, do you not see
Like
like what you're doing here? Like
I mean, yeah, like people lack a shocking amount of self-awareness.
self-awareness.
Like
It
and the one
blows
thing
my
is
mind.
like you said earlier, like if that you get heckled at hockey games all the time, like regardless of like the age group, parents are gonna say stuff. But it's like if you just like limit it to like, wow, that kid sucks at hockey. Look at number 10 over there, he sucks at hockey. Ha, like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like yeah, it's still shitty. You're still yelling at like a 9-year-old, but like at the end of the day, like that's something he can control. He can get better at hockey. You know, like he can get better at the sport. It's not like you're heckling him for again being a girl, like heckling her for no reason. It's like what, why? Like Who cares? She's
If
good
she can
if she's good
play,
at
she can
hockey. Yeah,
play.
exactly. Like if she can
Like,
play, who gives a fuck? And it's high school hockey. Like obviously they're not gonna have like a separate women's league. You know what I mean?
yeah, and like the bottom line at the end of the day, like
At the end of the day, who
it's
cares?
the NHL doesn't really run this campaign as much anymore because they've switched over to the Pride Nights campaign. But I mean, in years past, they've had the You Can Play, and I think that there's still a charity organization called You Can
They still
Play.
do you can play. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they changed it over to hockey's for everyone now.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
more
That
of the
yeah.
thing.
But like ultimately, the point remains like if you can play hockey, you can. I don't care who you are, what your background is, what race you are, and nobody should care. But unfortunately, this is like a thing that we have to deal with. So, I don't want to like again take too much time. I've already spent 20 minutes on this, but
Yeah.
ultimately, everyone who's involved in the hockey community, whether you play, whether you're a fan, whether you make content, whether you make podcasts, if you're a part of this hockey community, this is something we all have to get better at, and we all have to start calling out and not tolerate it anymore. Just get it out of our game. It has no place on a sheet of ice or in society at large, but specifically on a sheet of ice. Um, so we're going to switch over to some more positive news. The Vancouver Canucks have actually made history by hiring the first ever female assistant GM. I'm going to butcher your name. I apologize in advance. Let's see. It's Emily Castangue. I butchered that one. But yeah, she's the
Sorry, we butcher
first,
everyone's name.
the first ever female AGM. It says in this article in Vancouver Canucks history. I don't
It's
really
in NHL
know
history.
if it's NHL history. I
I think
believe
it is
so.
NHL history. I think she's the first female executive in NHL history, like period. I think she might want to like be the first female hire into a front office. That's not like a scout, you know.
Yeah, because she started off as an agent. Like she was an agent for Antoine Roussel at one point. Interestingly enough, and honestly, like this is great. It's great to me that again, ultimately where you want to end up is at a place where the hiring of a female AGM is not even a news article because it's so common, right? But
Right.
because it's so monumentous and it's such a big step in our game, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I don't know much about her, to be quite honest with you. I just very briefly glanced at her work beforehand. Like I said, she was a player representative. What's it called? Agent. I just read the word. I don't know why I forgot about that. Um, so she took that path through hockey, and she's blazing a path. And I mean, we're seeing more and more females get hired. I think, um, what team was it? One of the teams had a woman on their coaching staff.
Yeah, isn't it? She's like a skills coach or something.
Yeah, there was a skills coach, and I think there was another team. Maybe this was an AHL team. They had like a goalie coach. Um, and you know what? Honestly, I think this is great because, quite frankly, the path for women in hockey right now, playing wise, is still incredibly murky with the Professional Women's Hockey League being so in flux all the time. So I think like having
Yeah.
these opportunities to continue your path and your career in the game after you're done playing, I think is a great thing. And quite honestly, there's like a lot of women who have some very brilliant hockey minds that should probably be in these positions. So like hopefully, we will see more and more women in these positions. Like obviously not every great player makes a great coach, but I mean when you talk about some of the greatest female players, between people like Shannon Zabados and Hillary Knight, Amanda Kessel, like I'm sure that there's room and merit in hiring these people to be part of your coaching staff.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Um, so just kind of wanted to shout out that little bit of news so that we're acknowledging something important. And then the last part of NHL news that we're going to talk about here before we get to kind of our halfway mark is Aaron Dell just like lost his mind last night. Like I don't. Oh, actually, before we do that, again, real quick, we just want to congratulate Keith Yandel on breaking the Ironman streak set by Doug Jarvis. So an NHL record has fallen. 965 consecutive games is absolutely ridiculous. Like how he managed to do that as a defenseman specifically,
Yeah, with no injuries or anything.
it's like unbelievable. So just want to congratulate him on that. Um, But yeah, Aaron Dell just like completely went nuts and like lost his mind last night and just elbowed Drake Matheson in the head as he came around the net, and he got suspended 3 games for it. I mean, what was he thinking? Can you make any sense of this at all?
I mean, no, there's, bro, I don't know. I know he was getting lit up, so I mean, I know you're frustrated, bro, but like, why? Like, if you're a goalie and you want to give a guy a shot, like, I get it, but like, take your run at him like behind the net when it's like still kind of okay. You know what I mean? Like, you can kind of bump a guy behind the net as a goaltender and get your licks in without actually hurting him. Whereas like Drake Batherson, all he was trying to do was go around the net, and you just like clipped him and sent him flying into the boards. Like, it was so stupid. I I don't know what he was thinking. Like, I really don't.
I mean, I
And
think I
clearly
already
he
know.
wasn't.
I think I already know the answer, but like, there's no room for interpretation here, right? Like, this was clearly an intent to just lay somebody out.
Oh yeah, bro. It was like it's textbook interference. Like Drake Batherson isn't in the play. He doesn't have the puck. Like so one, it's already broken like that rule. It's like, and then you wade into the, like the cultural territory of like, bro, you're a goalie. Nobody can touch you. So why are you hitting people? You know. And
Yeah,
then on top of that, you added the fact that it's like you hit him with a flying elbow. It wasn't like he stood him. Like if he just stood up Drake Batherson and like hit him, and he fell down awkwardly and got hurt, it would have been like, yeah, it's shitty, but like I don't know if it's a suspension. Whereas like this, it's like Drake Batherson's almost completely by him, and then he throws like he chicken wings him and clips him and sends him flying. It's like, what? Like you can almost see the gears turning in Aaron Dell's head.
he's like, oh,
Yeah,
this guy's done.
yeah, he sees him and he's like, all right, now's my time to shine, baby. And then he hits him with like the Rock's people's elbow. Like he dropped the elbow pad. He like hit him with the turnbuckle. Like it was nuts. I don't know why he thought that was a good idea. I also don't know how it wasn't a penalty on the play.
Yeah,
Like I don't know how
yeah.
that's not interference at all, considering Buffalo had the puck.
That
Like
was what kind of blew my mind. Was obviously I knew the suspension was coming, but that this wasn't even called a penalty in game. Like in, I know the game goes fast, yada yada yada, right? But like,
but like you look at it, it's like, bro, an Ottawa center just went flying into the boards like that, like awkwardly, like he just got lit up, and they don't even have the puck. Like Buffalo skating away with the puck, like, huh? It feels like there was interference on the play for that one on me. Like, even if you didn't see it as the referee, I feel like you just kind of look up at the aftermath and are like, yeah, that's a call. Like there had to be something,
like
you
even
know?
you can even see his arm come up in real time. So there's just like no excuse as to like what the referee was looking at there. Just terrible refereeing, honestly.
Yeah, and even if you, like I said, even if you didn't see it, the odds are one of the linesmen or the trailing referee, like somebody saw that. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh
there's no
yeah.
reason they could have had a little huddle and been like, "All right, boys, what happened?" It's like, well, Aaron Dell lit up Drake Batherson for no reason, like absolutely no reason.
Yeah, so Aaron Dell gets to sit for 3. Well earned, I would say. And what really sucks too is he knocked Drake Batson out of the All Star game. That's
Yeah.
what's ultimately really kind of terrible in my opinion. Is that Batson's going to miss the All Star game with a leg injury. So kind of trash move on Aaron Dell's part. Um, so we'll move on and we'll kind of do our halfway mark stuff here. Obviously, we've had a lot to talk about since the season started. Um, we'll start with talking about some top teams here. I mean, the top 5 in the NHL, just in terms of points, is the Panthers, the Avalanche, the Lightning, the Rangers, and the Penguins. If you put on points percentage, the top 5 is actually the Avalanche, Hurricanes, Panthers, Lightning, and Penguins in that order. Rangers in Toronto and Minnesota not far behind. Um, What's been your biggest surprise of all these teams so far in any division, any conference? Like, what's been the biggest surprise team to you? In terms
The
of, like, we'll
Rangers,
say,
honestly.
okay, yeah, I was going to say in terms of, like, positive. We'll get to the negatives
Yeah, I
for
mean like the
sure.
Rangers, honestly. The fact that like I mean they started hot and like again I'm a Ranger fan, so like hometown, but like whatever. But like the truth is, I mean, like I didn't think they'd be. I don't think they're gonna win the President's Trophy. But the fact that they're even in the conversation, like near the top, in like the top 5 teams in the entire National Hockey League, like if you, If you would have told me that after they fired David Quinn, then the Rangers would go from missing the playoffs to being like arguably one of the best teams in the NHL this year, I would have laughed at you. 100%. I mean, I thought they were going to be a playoff team. I thought they'd be okay, but like I thought we'd be fighting for, a wild card, not second or first or second in our division. Kind of wild.
Um, Obviously, the Rangers this offseason made some big moves in a commitment to get stronger and tougher in general. A lot of people say, "Oh, they got afraid of Tom Wilson." I think that's bogus. I think they would have made these moves anyway because I think, quite honestly, they were getting physically abused by a lot of teams in the NHL, and they also probably were smart enough to look at teams like the Tampa Bay Lightning, the New York Islanders, the um, Dallas Stars, teams that had success in the playoffs over the last couple of years, and say, "Oh, one thing that they all have in common is that they have a fair share of grit down the lineup, and that's something that we're severely lacking, right?" So you go out and get Ryan Reeves, you go out and get Barclay Goodrow, you go out and get Patrick Nemeth, more stay-at-home defenseman, which is something that the Rangers desperately needed, and you go out and get a new coach. Now, do you think this has a lot to do with the coaching or more a roster move? Like, what do you think is like kind of shaking the Rangers
I
up
mean, I
from
think it's
like out of the playoffs to one of the best in the Eastern Division or
I
Eastern
think it's kind of
Conference?
50-50, right? Like I think the coaching has a lot to do with it because like there's a more team focused effort on defense. Like the team is more focused on defending than it has been in recent years, which I mean, I didn't think they were as good defensively as they've been until I looked, and I think they're top 10 in goals against in the NHL, which I thought was kind of wild. I know they're top 5 in penalty killing, so it's nice to see like and they've had decent penalty killing for the last couple of years under David Quinn, but it's nice to see like that success translates to now 5-on-5 defense as well. And now they're actually able to protect the net, and it helps having obviously Igor Shesterkin take over the net full time and be an animal. But I mean, I think Gerard Gallant's getting his fair amount or fair share of the success. Like I think he's getting his fair share of credit because I mean, he's not doing anything crazy. He managed to get through to the players and get them to buy in and play a more disciplined, aggressive brand of hockey. And bringing in guys like Ryan Reeves and Barclay Goodrow were really important up front, bringing some balance to the forward group.
Yeah, it's certainly something that they needed quite desperately over the last couple of years. Like I said, they had pretty much everything going for them except the grit down the lineup, and then people could argue that maybe need some help up the middle, but I think that was the most important part. Really, was like getting the team to defend and buy in, and a coaching change can really do wonders. And I think that the Rangers are in a good spot now. I don't really think that there's much of a problem with saying that I don't really see a reason, barring COVID and or injuries, as to why they would fall off. I think that they're doing pretty much everything right that you could really ask them. They're finally getting consistent play out of some of their more important pieces. One of them being Chris Kreider, who currently leads the NHL in goals. Like finally, instead of just being hot for like 2 months and then disappearing, it seems like he's going to be consistent throughout the whole season, which is huge for them.
Vanadjad is finally like after a cold start has managed to find some consistency.
Yeah, and like Ryan Strome is, 32 points in 39 games certainly helps. They would still like to get a little bit more out of guys like Laff and Kako, sure, but
But again, they're works in progress. So like the fact that we are where we are without them is kind of a good sign.
yeah, certainly. And when it comes to playoff time, it's a different discussion. A lot of newcomers to the roster or a lot of younger guys, but as of right now, I don't really see much of an issue with the Rangers. Like, could they be buyers at the deadline? Like, sure, maybe you add some like a seventh defenseman just for injury/COVID insurance. But
Apparently, the Rangers have been linked to Jacob Chikrin at the deadline, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
see, I
In theory, I
like
like
why
it.
rock the boat.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I like it from like a long-term projection, right? Because he's only 23. He's proven he's good enough because he's having another good year in Arizona after his 18-goal campaign last year. But like you said, like you really don't know where you are in terms of like, are you for real yet? You know what I mean? Because like, you can have all this regular season success as a young team, but you have no idea what you're in for until you get to the playoffs. You know?
Certainly.
And it's not like Jacob Chikrin's gonna bring with him a wealth of playoff experience that
Not
like
from
you're
where
gonna be
he's
like,
coming
oh,
from.
exactly that, because like you could say like, say they're bring just like offhand, they say they're bringing in a guy like Drew Doughty, right? You could be like, oh, okay, you're rocking the boat for a guy that's won 2 Stanley Cups, been to how many Western Conference Finals, been there, done that. Like I get like the experience at that point outweighs the fact of rocking the boat, but it's like, why are you gonna rock the boat to get into the playoffs when you don't even really know if you're for real or not? Because if you get in this year and say you go to the second round and you take a team like Washington deep into that second round, 7 games, and you lose, now at least you know, okay, we're for real, and now you can make those big moves to like try to add to a contending team. But say you add Jacob Chikrin and then you flop like awful, 4 games in the first round out. What'd you really learn, you know? And now you traded away pieces for seemingly nothing.
And the real issue is like, yeah, Jacob Chikrin is on a really fantastic contract. I mean, he's only making 4.6 for the next, after this year, he's still got 3 more years left on that deal. But to your point, ultimately, if you get to the playoffs and you flop, but offense isn't the problem, right? Say defense is the problem and you need more grit. Well, now you've already committed assets to a guy that's not solving those issues. I'd rather see the Rangers go into the playoffs and say, oh, okay, here's a hole in the lineup. We need a better second line center, right? Now let's use the assets that we would have used on Chikrin to acquire a second line center that's going to fix this problem. You know,
Right.
um, again,
Or if like depth on defense does become an issue, now it's like, oh, okay, now we can address this. Like this isn't, we're not firing in the dark. You know what I mean? We're not just shooting in the dark.
yeah, and I mean, chances are, like realistically speaking, this is a trade that would most likely happen. Like Jacob Chikrin getting traded from the Arizona Coyotes is most likely a trade that would happen in the offseason. Not saying it can't happen in regular season, but generally players of his caliber, specifically of his age, tend to get moved in the offseason.
It's just
So
there's
like
usually
chances
just a
are
lot
he's
of
still going
moving
to be
parts for
there,
that.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the Rangers are doing really really well. Like it doesn't really seem like they're going to slow down. Playoff viability, we can talk about that when it comes, but right now, I mean the train is going and it doesn't really seem to be stopping anytime soon. Teams that surprise me, I'll pick a different team because we don't need to talk about the Rangers again a second time. Just reiterate what we just said. I gotta say I'm very surprised with the Nashville Predators being at second place in the Central Division because I thought after the offseason they had where they lost Ryan Ellis, they traded him away. They didn't really
Add
make many
anything
moves that would have indicated to me that they're going to be any better than they were last year, which was entirely mediocre. We
until
knew
UC
that like
Saros carried them. Yeah.
yeah, like we knew Yusei Saros was going to get more and more comfortable being the starter and in terms of just getting more reps, more games played, et cetera, et cetera. But like looking at this lineup, I still see a lot of really big holes, specifically up front that I'm not too thrilled about their ability to continue this torrid pace into the playoffs. Like regular season, sure, but playoffs, I'm still kind of concerned about their viability just because like they still don't really have like a goal scorer. Like sure, they're getting like really good work out of a lot of their guys, but like chips are down game 7. I mean, they're still missing that kind of X factor to me. But I mean, for right now, like second place in the Central Division, which I mean, granted, look, teams in the Central Division have been as good as they were supposed to. Like they haven't had the stiffest competition from teams like the Dallas Stars or the Winnipeg Jets or the Chicago Blackhawks, but still, second place in that division's not no joke. It's not like something to just laugh at. So
Yeah. No, they've been impressive, and I mean They've had some bounce back years from guys. I mean, Matt Duchene's finally like looking like the number one center that they wanted for a while there. I think he was above a point per game pace. Philip Forsberg's been at or above a point per game pace since coming back from injury or COVID. I can't remember which one. I think it was COVID. But yeah, I mean they've been good. Like you said though, it's interesting that they're as good as they've been without really adding anything in the off season.
or yeah, I mean they haven't really like addressed any of the problems. In fact, they probably got worse considering that they traded away Ryan Ellis, but I mean, a lot of it is I think comes down to the fact that Yusei Saros is just playing as well as he is. Like a 2.37 and a 9.26 is like unreal. And the Predators have pretty good defense, all things considered. Like, I'm not taking anything away from their defensive prowess. I do think part of it, again, you're playing in a division where the Blues are they had a really slow start. The Blues did. The Wild are a pretty good team, but then like Dallas, they're all right. I'm not taking anything away from them. They're in second wild card spot, 22 wins in 40 games. But then you look at teams like the Jets, who are still just kind of listless. The Chicago Blackhawks are way worse than we thought they were going to be. And then, of course, everybody just gets to beat up the Arizona Coyotes whenever they want. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens with the Predators. But for now, I'm pretty impressed with what they're doing here. So, who's been the most disappointing team thus far, 41 games in your opinion?
I'm going to think about this one for a second. I'm going to take a...
All right, so if you want to think for a little bit, I'll just ramble on and give you a little bit of time to think. I got to be honest with you. Like, we can talk about the Oilers a lot, which we have at length. I mean, they're still technically above NHL 500 with 20 wins, but I mean, for the most disappointing team, in my opinion, obviously the Blackhawks are going to stand out because there's so much hype going into the season, but I still am just not understanding why this Jets team is not better than they are. I mean, the forwards, there's absolutely no problem with the forwards between guys like Scheifele, Ehlers, Kyle Connor, PLD, for Blake Wheeler. The forwards are not the problem. They have pretty good role players and guys like Andrew Kopp, who's one of the better depth centers in the league, Adam Lowry, Cole Perfetti's not a depth player, but like he had some really big points last night. Granted, he's he's gonna have 3 points in 9 games, but like he had a pretty good game the other night. They have like good depth players on forward. Maybe you could use a little bit more grit, but then you look at the defense and you still got guys like Dylan DeMello, Brendan Dillon, Josh Morrissey, Neil Pionk, Logan Stanley, Nate Schmidt, and then of course you have Connor Hellebuck in that. I don't know. I mean, even after Paul Maurice stepped down, this team has not really gotten much better. And granted, like we've discussed in the past, coaching changes in midseason, you typically don't have enough time to like implement your game plan fully. So maybe in the offseason, the Jets will find a permanent replacement for Paul Maurice, and we'll see the system change and things will turn around. But it's so frustrating looking at this team and being like, they are a pretty complete roster, and yet they play like a team that has holes up and down the lineup.
Yeah, I feel like they're the new age Calgary Flames. Like, on paper, they should be way better than they are.
Right, because it's like, I can't look at this roster, like, sure, you can argue maybe they need some better, third and fourth liners, some better role players here and there. Like, they could use a little bit of grit. Okay, the defense is young, but, I mean, we've been talking about how young this defense has been for the past 4 years, so at what point are we going to stop using that as an excuse? Because, okay, sure, guys like Neil Pionk are only 26. He's played, 262 games in the National Hockey League at this point. Josh Morrissey is 26. He's played 382 games in the NHL at this point. And they're being backed by guys like Dylan DeMello and Brendan Dillon, who are, Dylan DeMello is 28, 357 games experience. Brendan Dillon is 31, 690 games experience. Like, yeah, you have your young guys, but you have veterans to back them up. And a lot of their quote-unquote young guys, like even Nathan Beaulieu, is 29 at this point, 413 games experience. So at what point is it no longer an excuse to be like, oh, well, defense is young, it's going to learn. It's like, well, you're kind of running out of time. Because, like, at what point is it no longer an excuse to say a 26-year-old defenseman in the NHL that's played the better part of, 4 complete seasons is still young, Like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's very annoying because I keep looking at this team every year when you write standings predictions, and I'm like, here it is, Winnipeg Jets gonna be battling in the Central Division. And realistically, if there ever was a Central Division to compete in, it's this one, because you kind of have one really, really good team in the Colorado Avalanche. The Nashville Predators are like just underneath them. And then you have a couple teams like the Blues, the Wild, and the Stars who are good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from those teams, but it's not like the Central Division of old where you were battling like Stanley Cup champion Chicago Blackhawks and, having to contend with like the St. Louis Blues, who for some reason were never as good as they could have been in the postseason, but in the regular season they were always really good. You're not losing points to these really, really good teams. Like, you should be taking advantage of a relatively, I won't say weak, but a league
Weaker.
average, Central Division. And yet, for some reason, they're sitting here at 17, 15, and 7. Granted, they're only 5 points out of the wild card spot because the wild card in the West is kind of like wide open. But still, this is a team that I think should be either handedly having a wild card spot or kind of starting to make a push for a top 3 spot. And yet, here we are again talking about how bad they are. So I don't know. Jets are a conundrum to me. Maybe, like I said, they finally get a full-time coach to replace Paul Maurice and something will shake up. So who the hell knows?
Hopefully.
So who's your most disappointing team through halfway through the
So
season?
I'm gonna go with the Montreal Canadiens.
8 wins in 41 games? Yeah.
I mean, listen, I didn't think they were gonna be great, but like 8 wins in 41 games, bad? No, not by a long. I mean, and losing Carey Price to the player assistance program and all that stuff hurts, but it's not 8 wins bad. Like, it's not like you don't have a competent goaltender in Jake Allen, you know.
Yeah, and it's
And
not
they
like
have a pretty competent defensive core from what I remember. Like, it's not like they lost. I mean, they lost Shea Weber, but they've been playing large stretches of time without Shea Weber anyway. So
yeah, and it's not like, they didn't have I think the biggest disappointment really when it comes to this team is like the young guys like, Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield just being like
kind of falling flat.
mediocre would even be saying too much. It's just been bad. Like, I hate to say it because I absolutely love watching them in the playoffs. Like, they've just been bad.
Yeah.
You know, do you think it's time for this team to just fold and just build around these young guys, or what do you think the deal is here?
Yeah. I think the Get Carriers Cup train has left the station and is never coming back. I think like it's at this point in time just close up shop and start building around these younger guys and start trading off your older pieces. Like start trading off guys like Jeff Petrie and Brendan Gallagher to teams that might be in a position to compete. Because like they're not old yet, but they're also at that age where you'd be wasting their best years in like the 2 or 3, maybe 4 years of the rebuild you'd be in, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I didn't put them as a playoff team, but 8 wins in 41 games is yikes. They're worse than the Arizona Coyotes, who are bad by design. Like, the Arizona Coyotes went into the season, they were like, give me all your bad contracts, give me all the picks you want. I'll take all these horrific deals. I'm just going to sit in the basement for the next 5 years, and we're going to figure it out, right? Bad by design. Montreal was like, we lost Carey Price, but, like, we should still be, like the plane, crashes into the ground, right? Just wheels fall off the wagon. It just, ugh.
The real crazy part when you think about it is this is a team that was like designed around the concept of being able to defend, right? Like goaltending and defense was the strength of the Montreal Canadiens is what got them to the Stanley Cup final. They're minus 64. Their goals against, like their goal differential is second worst only to the Arizona Coyotes. Again, bad by design. Like, how is a team that was 2 years ago competing in a Stanley Cup final on the strength of this defense now giving up a league worst? You know, like it's unbelievable how bad they've been. And like you said, like the young guys, Cole Caulfield spent some time in the minors. Like he comes in, dominates in the playoffs, and then just absolutely does nothing when the regular season started. Like, oh,
Yeah.
what a mess in Montreal, man. Like,
Yeah, I think it's time to pack it in, put the lunch back in the brown bag and just go home and just
I mean, look,
like
when you're chasing the Buffalo Sabres and the Ottawa Senators in the standings, it's time to call it a day.
which the Buffalo
Like,
Sabres are also bad by design.
Again,
So
they traded away Jack Eichel, and the Ottawa Senators again are bad by design because they're just playing all of their young guys until they're ready, until they're like experienced enough in the NHL, you know? So it's like, oh, we have rebuilding team A, rebuilding team B, and rebuilding team C all at the bottom, and then we have the Montreal Canadiens. Like a team who, I mean, if this was a team that was at least showing some commitment to a youth movement, they wouldn't have let Kakaniemi go for nothing. And again, listen, we talked about that. I think the contract was stupid. I think the money was too much, but like, you let your number 3 overall pick walk for nothing? I mean, granted, you got the compensation, but like, you could have got more than what that, like, you got less than what he's worth on the open market, even as a pending RFA.
yeah, I mean,
And they
time will
finally fired
tell.
Bergevin, right?
Yeah. I mean, time will tell. Like right now, that contract's not looking too hot for the Canes because he only has 19 points in 39 games. So he's really on pace for 40 points, which you're paying us what $6.5 million to the guy or
Which is
whatever
now
it
his
is.
qualifying offer, yeah. I mean, I'm amazed at the Montreal ownership, the Molson family, they essentially let Mark Bergevin play Russian roulette with all 6 loaded barrels and let him fire all 6 barrels before they were like, oh, wait, he really screwed this up. It's like, yeah, I think after the second time where he pulled the trigger and it didn't work out, you could kind of look at it and go, oh, yeah, this isn't working. We should probably do something else. But no, he gets you to 2 Stanley Cup finals completely on flukes. Like, let's be honest. Like,
Oh yeah.
the only 2 Stanley Cup, the two big games they got to were entirely on flukes, and yet he still had a job every time. Like, oh,
And this was my worry too because you can go back and listen to those podcasts where we're talking about the Montreal Canadiens where I said I really genuinely think that making this deep run in the playoffs is a very bad thing for them because they're going to get caught up in their own success and not realize like, hey, realistically speaking, this Canadian division was terrible, wasn't very competitive. Really, most of the teams in that division were not playoff viable, and they got out of those first 2 rounds basically entirely on that strength of the fact that they're playing pretty bad teams. And then by that point, they were just really at that point. Let's not beat around the bush. It was the Carey Price show. The team wasn't doing anything that special, but Carey Price was like fired up from 2 rounds of playoff success. And I was like, listen, this is still not really a great team. They really should temper their expectations, not do anything crazy. But they keep going on like they're like it's 1970s all over again. It's not. It hasn't been the 70s for a while, and really Montreal in Carey Price's entire tenure there has never really been more than like a dark horse Stanley Cup candidate. Like they've never really had a team where I could look at and say, yeah, they're bona fide Stanley Cup champions. Because like even when they were really good in the early 2010s, still didn't have scorers. They were still undersized. Just a host of problems. So yeah, I mean it's bad in Montreal, and it's not getting any better anytime
no.
soon. Um, so before we wrap up here, we'll do 2 segments. Obviously, the last segment, as always, is going to be our way too early, going to be completely irrelevant in 2 weeks Stanley Cup prediction. But um, who's a team to keep your eye on here in the second half? Like, who do you think? Whether they're in the playoffs currently or sneaking up on the playoffs, like who's a team do you think is worth keeping an eye on for any reason going into the second half of the season?
I'm gonna put my money on the LA Kings here. I think that like they're proving that like their blue collar success is like real. I mean, listen, they're not doing anything special, but they have committed to like playing in tight checking close hockey games, and even if they miss the playoffs, the fact that they are where they are right now at this point in the season is really impressive. Considering like their goaltending is 35-year-old or 36-year-old Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson, who aren't exactly stalwarts anymore or never were in Cal Peterson's case, you know?
Yeah, I mean Cal Peterson, like he's starting to get some good reps in the NHL. Like he's 27, so he might be just the next version of Jack Campbell, where it just takes him a while to kind of settle in. But I mean, Jonathan Quick having a 2.53 and a 9.14 on this team is incredibly impressive. I mean, we can't discount the work that Anze Kopitar is putting in. I mean, 37 points in 43 games is nothing to sneeze at from a guy of his caliber, or quite frankly, his age, being 34. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super sold, and you can ask Tim because Tim loves to beat the LA Kings drum here. I'm not super sold on them in terms of their long term. This is weird. Sorry, completely aside. If you go to the LA Kings stats page, they have the standings from from the 56 game season. Because I saw the Arizona Coyotes above them, and I was like, that's not accurate at all. Anyway, I think.
Listen, I'm not gonna tell you the LA Kings are like great,
Yeah,
but I definitely think they're an interesting team to watch, for the very least.
I would certainly say so. And if nothing else, because you can kind of see the next generation starting to kind of put their place in. I mean, Arthur Kaliev, sure, only 12 points in 42 games this season, but the fact that he's been in a lineup for 42 games demonstrates that the LA Kings are committing to the younger guys.
Byfield just got in the game.
Thank you. Yeah,
his first game.
I don't know why that his name's Jacob Byfield. Quentin Byfield just got in his first game the other day. So, I think long term the outlook for the LA Kings is just run into the playoffs and see what happens. Ultimately, I don't think that this success is going to be sustainable for the next couple of years. But if nothing else, this is good practice for the young guys that will then turn into those guys that are going to sustain success for several years to come. So yeah, I mean, I think the LA Kings are definitely an interesting team. For teams that are going to be worth watching down the stretch, I mean, I'm tempted to say the Islanders just because their last 10 games are 7-2-1. Problem is they've had such a big hole to climb out of just because their season got torpedoed early on. I would say keep an eye on them out of the side of your eye, but if you're not an Islander fan, I can understand why you wouldn't want to watch them because boring hockey or whatever. Team to keep an eye on, no. I'm not going to say the Oilers because, I mean, we know what the Oilers can do. It's not really a surprise if they turn around and make the playoffs anytime soon. I will say that I think it is worth keeping an eye on the Boston Bruins, if nothing else, just for the circus that this team is putting on right now, because they got absolutely torn to shreds the other night by the Carolina Hurricanes, and then they came out and lost against the Anaheim Ducks. And I think it's interesting keeping an eye on them just because this might truly be the last hurrah. That we're starting to get to the point with this team where you never know if this is going to be the last year that we can really talk about them being as good as they are. I think that they probably have another year or two left as a playoff team after this, but this might really be the last time that we can sit down and say, hey, this team looks like Stanley Cup caliber. And I think it's important to kind of just keep an eye on that because it's always interesting to see the changing of the guard. We've seen the Blackhawks fall off. We've seen the LA Kings fall off. The Bruins are the last kind of the Vancouver Canucks fell off. The Bruins are kind of that last team from the early 2010s who kind of sustained a lot of their success through and are still currently successful. So,
yeah.
If nothing else, if you hate the Bruins like I do, you can watch and say this is the last time you're going to have to worry about them.
Hopefully.
Do you think Jeremy Swayman is looking at Tuukka Rask's 4.28 and 8.44 and he's just texting the GM every day hey.
He's just bruh.
He's hey, can I
listen, I would have got lit up too, but it wouldn't have been 9-1 or 7-1, whatever it was.
Yeah. So we'll end it here with our way too early, gonna be irrelevant in 2 weeks Stanley Cup predictions. I'll go first. I really like the Florida Panthers, and not just because they're at the top of the NHL, because we've seen teams at the top of the NHL before who were obvious glass cannons and obviously weren't going to be going anywhere come playoff time. I think the Florida Panthers have a pretty complete roster from top to bottom. They've got great depth, great help up the middle. They've got grit. They've got great defense, great goaltending. I like everything about the Florida Panthers. So I'm going to say Florida Panthers, and my team from the Pacific, It's hard to, or from the Pacific, from the West. It's kind of hard to say because I really don't have that much faith in the Colorado Avalanche as a playoff team. But I'm not super bought on any of these other teams either. My best bet would be the Vegas Golden Knights, only just because if they're playing this well without Jack Eichel, I think that adding a scorer and a center like him is only going to help them. I don't want to see them go anywhere, obviously. I don't like them, but I'm not sold on the Avalanche, and I'm really not sold on any other teams. I could see the Predators. Nashville would be a decent pick, but right now I'm going to stake my claim on Florida Panthers and Vegas Golden Knights.
I'm going to go with the Carolina Hurricanes, just because I think they're finally playing up to their potential. And, I mean, adding Freddie Anderson's a big help in net when their biggest hole in the playoffs the last couple years have been their goaltenders. And I think I'm going to go with Vegas, too, just because I think Vegas is, like, the most complete of those teams in the West. I think Colorado's a big glass cannon.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what would be
people
really
just don't want to admit it.
I really hope, and not because I want either of the teams ahead of them to fail, I hope the Carolina Hurricanes win the Metro and play the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round. I really
so
would.
Freddie Anderson can knock his team out.
I would. That would be must-watch TV. I would love to see that.
I would just love to see the veins bursting in Kyle Dubas' forehead in the press box.
He's like, what do you mean?
He's like, my core sign numbers.
He's like, wait, this Fenwick number doesn't add up. I don't get it. Big freaking
my fancy stats.
Freaking nerd.
Like we have one defensive defenseman in Jake Muzzin. That was more than enough last year. It's like actually Freddie Anderson last year.
Not to mention, it wasn't even enough because you still lost to the Canadiens.
You got slapped silly, yeah. You lost 3 straight to the Canadiens.
Up 3-1. Going back to home ice. Yeah, that worked out real well. So that's going to be it for this episode. Next week, who knows? We'll see what the NHL brings us. We're still a bit off from the trade deadline. Actually, when is the trade deadline this year?
Yeah, I think trade deadline's in March, I think.
Excuse my typing in your ears. Monday, March 21st. So, yeah. So, we're about a little bit over 2 months away from the trade deadline. Or a little bit less than 2 months away from the trade deadline. Obviously, those talks are going to heat up real quick, as they always do. So, who knows? Maybe we'll be talking about that. I don't know. Maybe Brad Marchand will throw another temper tantrum on Twitter or something.
Maybe Subban will slew foot somebody again. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe by this time next week, Connor McDavid has 140 points, but the Edmonton Oilers are still out of the playoff spot. Typical Edmonton things.
Like 20 points a game, still losing.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, that would really be the most Edmonton thing you could do, right?
Imagine if I told you that there's a team right now with a 59-point man and a 57-point man, and you're still not in the playoffs. Ouch. But yeah, maybe next week we'll take a look at some of the big trades in the offseason. We'll kind of rank them, grade them halfway through the season. Maybe that could be interesting. Who knows? We'll see. Depends on what we get into.
The big fat F right on their forehead.
Just slap an F right on.
There's a big L.
But yeah, so who knows? Next week we'll figure it out. But I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again next time.